We're here at the Sea House in downtown Chicago, where Lucas Henning is our wine director. We're here with Fred Scherrer, and he's going to be talking about some of his wines and some questions that are often asked from some of my students. What do you use a pre-soak for and a post-soak for?
A pre-soak, what people say they use it for is to extract color and not tannin. So you're getting darker wines that aren't going to be quite as angular. And I really don't do that, even though I kind of do.
Okay, that's a straight answer.
It is, and this is actually going to be kind of a long answer, but I do what is called a cool soak. I bring in grapes that often are relatively warm, or a little warmer than I'd like them to be. So then I have a means to cool them down through pumping the juice through a heat exchanger and just kind of pumping it over gently, and then running very cold juice back over the mass of slightly warmer grapes. And I try to bring them down to a temperature that is about, in Fahrenheit, it might be 58 or 60 degrees. And it allows me to focus on outdoor things. Before I get fermentations really ripping inside the winery, I can focus on tasting grapes and doing things outside the winery before I get involved doing a bunch of cellar work inside. I don't do it for stylistic reasons. If there is any stylistic side effect, I accept that.
So more for logistical reasons.
It's purely logistical for me. A lot of people say they get rounder wines with the cold soak.
Okay.
But I was once in a little discussion with a winemaker from New York and a colleague in Russian River Valley. And the guy in Russian River Valley, we were asked a question about cold soak, and I started laughing about the whole thing. But the guy from Russian River Valley says, I love it, do it all the time, totally believe in it. The guy from New York State says, don't believe in it, it's the worst thing in the world, never would think of doing it. So they asked me, what do you think? And I said, I think we should define what a cold soak is. And so the guy in Russian River says, well, the fruit usually comes in about, in Fahrenheit, 65, 70, maybe 72 degrees, and I drop it down to whatever, the high 50s, something 55 or something like that. And I use dry ice to do that. So he's going to great lengths and great expense to chill these grapes down. But the guy from New York says, yeah, we usually harvest at about 45 degrees. And I try to warm them up, if anything, to about the same temperature that the other guy did, or just leave it where they are. Mm-hmm. So I said, so the guy who doesn't do the cold soak actually has colder grapes sitting there for longer than the guy who claims
So he's
to do
actually
cold soak.
Doing a cold soak in
Right.
essence, and
Exactly.
but he's not actually applying any resources for it.
Exactly. So the fellow from New York who doesn't believe in cold soak didn't see any reason to drop his grapes even lower in temperature,
right.
because they were already plenty
Lower
cold, lower than you probably wanted them, and it took forever for the fermentation to begin. So I think it's better to define the conditions and what the point of the conditions are.
Okay. And so why do winemakers want their grapes at lower temperature? Solely for logistical reasons, like you said, or is there a winemaking?
There's supposedly winemaking reasons, but there's a lot of debate now, and I think some of the eggheads or scientists and researchers have proven that there's not substantial lasting effect.
Okay.
I don't know. I visited Burgundy in the late 80s and early 90s, and Guillecade was a big consultant at that time, and you could kind of tell which house was a client of his by how the young wines show. But I wasn't able to see those wines after several years in the cellar because he hadn't been consulting for them. Mm-hmm. But the wines were a little darker. They were maybe a little more tannic.
And he was a proponent of the cold soaking.
The cold soak, but my vague understanding is that there was elevated levels of SO2 as well. So SO2 will tend to cause things to extract more. So I'm not sure really what all matters, or what the most important parts of that was.
Okay.
I believe in a cool soak, and it's purely logistical.
Okay, that helps. And then what about for people who do post-fermentation maceration?
That is something I tend to do. Or at least I tend to allow the red wines to go dry on the skins, and stir them up once a day so that I can get a good sample. Spin the solids out in a lab centrifuge so I can taste it clearly. And I think the best vineyard sites I've worked with tend to respond well to this. There are a few vineyard sites that don't respond well, and I've learned that, and I've learned not to do that to them. Mm-hmm. But I find that it's like building a house. You tend to the angles and the structure of the wine tend to emerge, and they get big and maybe a little clunky for a couple of days, and then the walls go up and the insulation, and pretty soon it's furnished and you're moving in.
Okay.
So at the point where it becomes ready to move in, that's when I decide it's time to do out and press.
So would you say that a pre-soak in theory might extract more of the round?
That's the
and
theory.
then the post-fermentation would be more of the angles?
Probably, although I see angles beginning and then the wine seems rounder. So I don't know whether I'm extracting more round things or the angular things have polymerized and become less angular.
Okay.
That I don't know, and I don't really care, quite honestly, because I'm looking for the balance and the effect. So, I've pondered it, but I'm not in a position to analyze the minutia of that chemically. It might be interesting someday, but right now I'm just
focused on
making wine.